My husband and I sold steaks made from human flesh. My name is Natalia Bakshiva, and together with my husband Dmitry Bakshiv, we were known as the Krasnodar cannibals, and you will soon understand why. Together, we killed and devoured dozens of people from Russia, just like us. To hide our acts, I discovered that my culinary talents could help us make money and round off our month-end finances while concealing and using our corpse remains. That's when we started selling pies and minced steaks to people without revealing that it was human meat. But our dark secret didn't last. One day my husband lost his phone on the street, and it contained macabre photos, including pictures of how we made our steaks. We were then arrested in 2017, and investigators found human remains in our freezer. I was therefore sentenced to 10 years in prison, and my husband was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and is required to undergo psychiatric treatment. Do you think it's deserved or not? Let me know in the comments.
I had sex with my 14-year-old student when I was 23. My name is Hannah Harris, and I was a teaching assistant. I was working at a school in North London where a 14-year-old boy was attending. At the beginning of the year, I noticed this boy, and we exchanged numbers. I then set up a stratagem to get closer to the pupil, so I started taking him to the store to buy his favorite sweets. I bought him ice cream several times, and I even took her to McDonald's. And so that his parents wouldn't think it was strange, I made them believe I was the mother of the teenager's girlfriend. By doing all this, I managed to get closer to him and get what I really wanted, but I blackmailed him to keep it all secret. Then one day while we were in a supermarket parking lot, his older brother saw us doing things together, so he immediately alerted his parents and an investigation was launched. I was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and I'm now banned from working with minors and registered as a sex offender for life. Do you think it's deserved?
75 passengers lost their lives because I let my children into the cockpit. My name is Yaroslav Kudrinsky, and in 1994, I was one of the pilots on a flight from Russia to Hong Kong. This time, my 2 children were passengers on the flight, so it was very special for me. A few hours after takeoff, I decided to let my children into the cockpit to show them how everything worked. While the plane was on autopilot, I let them sit in the main seats and play with the plane's controls. They were excited, and since it was on autopilot, it supposedly wasn't dangerous. I told my son he could turn the wheel to see how it felt. Unfortunately, this deactivated the autopilot, and before we knew it, we were almost at 90 degrees and descending uncontrollably. We tried to turn the plane around, but we just couldn't do it. We didn't know what was happening, nor could the air traffic controllers help us. Unfortunately, we crashed into a mountain in Russia and we all lost our lives.
I was shot 9 times in the same night and survived. My name is Curtis Jackson, but you probably know me better as 50 Cent. I was born in Queens, New York, into a family involved in drug trafficking. My mother died in a mysterious fire when I was only 8 years old. I was raised by my grandmother, but I started selling drugs at the age of 12 to survive. I was arrested multiple times for drug trafficking, but it was in 2000 that my life almost took a fatal turn. One evening, as I was about to get into my car, a man approached and opened fire. I was hit 9 times, including a bullet to the cheek that left a visible hole. Doctors told me I had little chance of surviving, but I proved them wrong. After my recovery, I decided to focus on my music career. I was discovered by Eminem and Dr. Dre, who signed me to their label. My first album, Get Rich or Die Trying, was a phenomenal success, propelling me to the top of the charts. But even at the top, life was not easy. Today, I am not only a successful rapper, but also an actor, producer, and entrepreneur.
These are the weirdest facts you will ever hear, part 1. Abraham Lincoln once pardoned a man who was accused of trying to have sex with a horse. And the reason President Lincoln pardoned him was because the man was drunk. Next up, ancient pharaohs used to masturbate and ejaculate into the Nile River to make sure the river will continue flowing. This is absolutely crazy, and just imagine being a bystander watching this. Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the 36th president of the United States, often whipped out his penis, which he nicknamed Jumbo. And he also peed himself a lot and in public. Next, until the late 1800s, some male singers would be castrated to preserve their high-pitched voice, which is just insane. Adolf Hitler had a micro you-know-what. And not only that, he did not pee out of the tip. He had a condition where he peed from the underside of his you-know-what, This definitely made him a super insecure man. Finally, noble women in ancient Rome would often pay to sleep with gladiators. And some gladiators were so popular that they were able to buy their freedom with the money they made from doing it. This is what would happen if oxygen disappeared for 5 seconds. Up first, in just 5 seconds without oxygen, you can say goodbye to anything that was made of concrete. These structures would instantly collapse because oxygen acts as a special binding agent to concrete, and without it, concrete is just dust. Next up, there would be no more ozone layer. The ozone layer is our protection against the sun's UV rays, and it's made of oxygen. And there would be nothing protecting us from the UV rays. On top of that, our inner ear would explode. Losing oxygen means losing 21% of our air pressure. A change in air pressure that drastic is the same as being at sea level and then dropping down to 2,000 meters instantly. Next, without oxygen, there is no fire. So the combustion process in vehicles won't be able to occur. Any mode of transport that isn't electric will automatically fail. Planes will fall from the sky and millions of cars will be stopped in their tracks. Finally, as all that is happening, the Earth's crust would completely crumble. That is because Earth's crust is made up of 45% oxygen. Without oxygen involved in the surface, there wouldn't be much left. The crust would crumble and continue to crumble until there is completely nothing left, sending you and every single person on the planet into a freefall.
The black paintings made by Francisco Goya are some of the most disturbing works of art ever produced, and the story behind them is interesting as well. So Francisco Goya is one of the most renowned artists of all time, but these paintings from his final years of his life, dubbed the black paintings, are disturbing. This work right here shows a witch's Sabbath. I mean, you can see a sort of Baphomet-influenced figure up top, people cowering in fear. And what I think was really crazy that I found out about this is that these paintings were not actually painted on canvases. In February of 1819, Francisco Goya acquired a villa in Spain. And during his time spent living in this villa, apparently he was going through a lot. In contrast to other works that he had been hired to produce or commissioned to produce, these were works of art that he did in his own home, all over the walls. And they really showed his innermost emotions and his thoughts. I mean, the entire villa of Francisco's was completely decorated with all of these different works. And in order for them to be preserved, they eventually had to be removed from the villa itself. The layers of wallpaper were removed and stuck onto canvases, and that's how the black paintings came to be. Now, a lot of people have been to the museum where these are displayed and said that they give them a very weird, almost paranormal type vibe. Almost like when you look into these paintings, the paintings look back into you. It's definitely a collection of works that I'd love to visit one day, but I can't help but admit that they are very creepy. What do you think? Would you like to pay these paintings a visit?
Let's talk about this picture. It centers around Mr. and Mrs. Dubois. They were some of the town of Hackenshaw's favorite neighbors, but they had a dark side to them. But first, we're gonna enjoy some pizza. This is like my favorite pizza. It's from Marco's Pizza. Reminds me of Jersey because I'm from Jersey. You see, they were kind to everyone, even invited people who just moved into town for dinners. They would also have the best decorations for holidays as well. Their house would always win the contest for best decorated in the town. People just loved their Christmas lights and their Halloween decorations. In the beginning of October 1876, they started throwing parties for the kids. All the kids from around the town would come, even from outside the town. It was fun. They played games, they ate candy, and everyone just had a good time. But out of the 20 kids that came over that night, about 4 went missing. And after about 3 weeks of searching, the case went slow and they gave up. Halloween finally came around, and the contest for the best decorations, of course, went to the Dubois. That night while trick-or-treating, one of the boys in town named Sam went up to one of the decorations. When he grabbed the mask off, he realized it was one of the children who went missing. The child was stuffed and put on display in front of the yard as a decoration. The Dubois, who saw this and not wanting to get caught, grabbed the little kid inside, adding him to their collection. No one suspected a thing because the Dubois was so kind and nice to everyone. It wasn't until years later on their deathbed that they admitted at throwing parties every year to steal a child or 3 and show police that they could find all the missing children in their basement. The reason they did it was because they needed decorations realistic enough so they could always win those contests.
This is Justin Smith, the Nickelodeon Predator. You may have seen him before on the show To Catch a Predator with Chris Hansen. I mean, it's hard to forget this guy with his very unique Nickelodeon colored hair. But he was one of the worst. So at the time that he was caught in the sting, Justin Smith was a 27-year-old freelance post-production editor working for Nickelodeon Studios. And at the time that he was caught in the sting, he thought that he was talking to an underage girl named, ironically, Carly. The full chat logs between Justin and Carly are available online, and they are incredibly disturbing to read. And obviously it shows that this guy was a dangerous predator. Like always happens with these predators online, he engaged this girl in a very normal way at first, and then it slowly descended into these dark, very, very inappropriate discussions, which then led Justin to show up at the Sting house knowing that he had everything to lose. Now, I would count Justin as an unofficial member of the Nickelodeon Creep Club, because there have been a number of people that have worked at and for Nickelodeon that have abused kids, and have been suspected of abusing kids over the years. Now, even though he was arrested after the sting, sadly Justin served no jail time. He had to volunteer. He now has to register as a sex offender, but that was it. Now, I don't know if this is the same Justin Smith that was caught on To Catch a Predator, but if you look up Justin Smith on IMDb, you are led to a profile of a guy who has worked with a number of Nickelodeon shows on the post-production side of things. And this IMDb states that he was actually rehired in the year 2019 to work on Nickelodeon shows. Now, I don't know if this is a different Justin Smith, and I definitely don't want to slander his name if it isn't the same guy that we're talking about here, but if it is, I cannot believe Nickelodeon would rehire a attempted child predator to keep working on children's shows. And if that is true, it would show that Nickelodeon never really learned their lesson from any of these cases. This man went from a national hero to a national villain in just a day's time. This is Bernie Ward, a former talk show host from San Francisco, California. Bernie was for a long time the host of a daily news program called The Bernie Ward Show. He also hosted a 3-hour-long radio program on Sundays called God Talk. Bernie was a bleeding heart liberal. He preached about women's rights. He preached against homophobia. He tried to get the Catholic Church to come clean about their sexual abuse scandals. And over time, he raised $4 million for charity through an annual Thanksgiving event. Now, Bernie was actually so well loved by his community that when it was rumored that the station was going to cancel his show, hundreds, thousands of people showed up to protest the show's cancellation, and they got him put back on air. But Bernie's star would dramatically burn out in the year 2007. You see, on September 20th, 2007, Bernie was indicted for 2 counts of attempting to distribute and 1 count of receiving CP or CSAM materials. The story goes like this. A dominatrix who worked online contacted the police after having some disturbing chats with Bernie. Apparently, he described to this online dominatrix in a chat room about how he had engaged in explicit activities with his own children, and he then sent her CP images through the chat. Now, when Bernie was arrested, he claimed that this was all innocent role-playing and that he was actually studying American culture for a new book he was writing. His attorney even insisted he was not in possession of CP materials, but that whole narrative changed soon after. Because when they checked Bernie's email account, they found over 100 images of CP or CSAM. He was then sentenced to only 6 years in prison, and he was released in the year 2014. That means that Bernie is still out there somewhere, able to access a computer, and only God knows what he's up to nowadays.
This is the disturbing case of the Slender Man stabbing. On the morning of the 31st of May 2014, a man on a bike ride in Wisconsin made a shocking discovery. A 12-year-old girl, Peyton Leutner, was lying on the grass covered in blood. The day prior, the young girl had been at a sleepover with some of her friends. She hadn't realised that the sleepover had been a trick to lure her into the woods to murder her. 2 years before what the media dubbed the Slender Man stabbing, Peyton had met her friend Morgan at school. The pair had become friends when Peyton noticed her sitting alone in the cafeteria and felt sorry for her. The two became close, and then they made another friend, Anissa Weir. Anissa, on the left here, was described as a cruel girl. She seemed really jealous of the friendship between Peyton and Morgan. As their friendship grew, Anissa and Morgan became obsessed with the internet meme Slender Man. Slender Man was a tall, faceless man with long arms who turned viral when people would Photoshop him into creepy images. The mythical man would prey on young children and lure them into the woods to kill people. Shockingly, around December 2013, Morgan and Anissa concocted a plan to kill someone in order to show their dedication to the fictional Slender Man. Their plan was to invite Peyton to Morgan's birthday to get her alone, and then lure her into the woods and kill her. Morgan actually described this as a flawless plan. As the girls started their walk to the woods, Morgan snuck a knife from her kitchen into her waistband. They then completely blindsided poor Peyton. Morgan jumped on top of her and started stabbing her. The two perpetrators then run off, claiming that they were going to go and get help. The young girl was left to struggle on her own and crawl towards the road to get help. When the cyclist discovered her, an ambulance arrived and nurses noted that she had 19 stab wounds. She had 6 hours of intensive surgery but miraculously survived. The girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Now, the jury actually found Morgan not criminally responsible due to schizophrenia. She was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa had apparently experienced shared psychotic disorder and was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health institution. This is the horrific case of the acid bath murderer. In February 1949, a warehouse was raided. Police stormed the West Sussex premises of John Haig. Inside, they discovered enormous containers of sulfuric acid. Horrifically, they also unearthed nearly 30 pounds of melted human body fat and a foot. It was obviously the scene of a horrific crime, and the acid was there to assist in a cover-up. John Haig was born into a wealthy family in Yorkshire. Although he was a high achiever in school, he was arrested aged 25 and jailed for fraud. His life spiraled downhill after this, and his family decided to cut him off, and his wife left him. After being released from prison, he continued to scam people out of money. He pretended to be a solicitor and sold people fraudulent shares. Again, he got found out and was imprisoned. This is when he realised that in order to truly get away with his crimes, he couldn't leave his victims alive. He started researching murderers and how they would dispose of bodies. He figured out sulfuric acid would help him to dispose of evidence. When he was yet again released from prison, he bumped into an old friend, William McSwan, who was working as a landlord. Now, because John was jealous of William's success, he lured him into an abandoned basement and killed him by hitting him over the head. He then dissolved William's body in a huge drum of acid until he turned to liquid. John was able to then simply pour him away. John then took over William's landlord job, and when William's family became suspicious, he killed them too. He stole $10,000 from the deceased family, and due to a gambling problem, the money quickly ran out. He needed to find another wealthy couple to rob and murder. After pretending to be interested in buying a house from a couple, he murdered them. Archibald and Rose Henderson were his victims. They were again disposed of with acid in his warehouse. After 5 murders, he ended up renting a bigger warehouse in order to kill his next victim. He murdered his wealthy, widowed neighbour after luring her into the warehouse. Now, John's mistake was this new warehouse had no drainage. He was unable to dump the liquid body into sewers and had to store it behind the property. Police made the gruesome discovery and John was charged with murder. He pleaded insanity and said that drinking the blood of his victims caused him to go mad. The jury rejected this and he was sentenced to death. He was executed in 1949.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is the most sick, disturbing killer couple I've ever heard of. Canadian couple Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka seemed like a normal boyfriend and girlfriend. Paul was a salesman and Carla had a degree in psychology. Prior to meeting Carla, Paul had a troubled childhood. In 1975, his dad was convicted for SAing a child. There were even rumours that he'd SA'd his own daughter. When Paul grew up and went to uni in Toronto, he started picking up women at bars and clubs and taking them back to humiliate and beat them. Now, in May 1987, Scarborough in Ontario was tormented by hideous crimes. In one instance, a young girl was grabbed off the bus near her parents' house and SA'd. The following week, there were 2 similar assaults. Over a period of 5 years, Paul was responsible for these assaults and many more. He's thought to have R'd or attempted to R over 19 girls. Paul then met Carla in 1987. The pair were a toxic concoction as they both shared the same sick fantasies. While they dated, Paul was SAing girls in the local area and Carla approved of this. Disgustingly, soon Paul turned his attention to Carla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy. Carla sickeningly expressed a wish for Paul to have Tammy's V as a Christmas present. Helping Paul to fulfill their sick desire, Carla spiked her own sister's drink, and the pair took turns SAing her. They videotaped the whole brutal act. Tragically, the young girl began to choke on her own vomit and died. Her death was ruled an accident. In 1991, Carla lured another teenage girl to their home. They spiked and abused her and again videotaped it. The girl had absolutely no memory of the incident. The pair got married in June 1991, and on the day of their wedding, a couple were out canoeing when they discovered human body parts in the water. The body parts belonged to a 14-year-old who had disappeared on the 15th of June. This girl was Leslie Maffei. The couple had again SA'd her before killing her. In 1992, another teenager was snatched by the couple. They killed 15-year-old Kristen French and dumped her in a ditch. Now, tips soon came into police about Paul and his violent nature. Things would come crumbling down for the couple when in 1993 he attacked Carla with a torch and the pair broke up. Police matched DNA from Paul to many of the cases and he was arrested. In her trial, Carla tried to claim that she was a victim herself and said that Paul was the mastermind. However, police had got hold of the sick videotapes filmed by the couple, and this completely contradicted this. Carla was imprisoned but was released in 2005 and has remarried and given birth. Paul was sentenced to life and has never shown any remorse for his victims. This police officer arrested a young girl, kidnapped her and murdered her. Sarah Everard was born in Surrey in 1987. At the time of her disappearance, she was living in the Brixton area and working as a marketing executive. On the 3rd of March 2021, she was walking home from visiting a friend in Clapham, South London. At around 9 p.m, she began the 2.5-mile journey home from her friend's house. She'd initially been chatting to her boyfriend on the phone as she walked home. She was captured on camera walking alone at around 9:32 p.m. 3 minutes later, a bus CCTV camera captured her being kidnapped. Within a matter of 5 minutes, she was gone. She'd been stopped by Wayne Cousins. He was a police officer and he used his powers to handcuff her at about 9:34 p.m. He was using the excuse of her breaching COVID guidelines. It transpired that on the 28th of February, Wayne had rented a white Vauxhall from a car hire company in Dover in order to kidnap a lone female. After kidnapping the vulnerable woman, he drove her to Kent. Police launched an urgent investigation when Sarah's boyfriend Josh reported her missing. On the 5th of March, Wayne was captured on CCTV filling a petrol container at a service station. He then shockingly burned Sarah's dead body inside of a fridge. On the 8th of March, he went off sick from work with stress. On the 9th of March, he was arrested. When officers asked, he initially denied knowing Sarah. He then concocted an elaborate story of how a gang of Eastern Europeans had threatened him and his family. He claimed that they had demanded that he would collect a girl for them. He claimed that he'd picked Sarah up and dropped her off for them as he was fearing for his family's life. And while he was in police custody, Wayne was hospitalised following a self-inflicted head injury. A week after she vanished, Sarah's remains were discovered in a woodland area of Kent. This was only metres away from land owned by Wayne. She had to be identified from dental records, and this happened on the 12th of March. On the day she was identified, Wayne was charged with kidnap and murder. He would eventually plead guilty to kidnap, murder and R. It was discovered that Wayne had hired a car and bought a roll of strong tape days prior to the murder. This was obviously evidence of premeditation. He was sentenced to life in prison, but shockingly that was not the last we would hear of Wayne. He was charged with 4 further counts of indecent exposure related to alleged incidents in January and February 2021. He pleaded guilty to 3 incidents. Sickeningly, the following year, 2 of his colleagues, Jonathan Coburn and Joel Borders, were jailed for sending grossly offensive messages. The 3 police officers were part of a sickening WhatsApp group where they sent racist, homophobic, misogynistic and ableist messages.
At just 16 years old, Becky Watts fought for her life while her stepbrother and his girlfriend viciously attacked her, living out a fantasy that they'd sickeningly conjured up together. Becky lived in Bristol with her dad Darren and his wife Angie. She suffered from mental health problems and anorexia. She'd been seen by a number of professionals over the years, and it was noted that her behaviour was worse when she'd been in the presence of her stepbrother Nathan, who often teased her about her weight. Becky had told a family support worker that she was scared of a lot of things, But instead of listening to her, she was described in this assessment as controlling and lacking aspiration. She was treated as problematic rather than a troubled teenager with a difficult past. Nathan lived nearby with his girlfriend Shauna, and sickeningly, they had a shared desire to kidnap a petite teenage girl. They both seemed to have an obsession for young girls, and when the couple met, Nathan was 22 and Shauna was just 15. At 22 and 29, they lived in a filthy house and spent most of the time in their bedroom. They even kept a kettle and a toaster in there, so they didn't need to leave the room to eat or drink. Nathan was viewing pornography every day, and it usually included young girls or women dressed up like schoolgirls. The couple often talked about kidnapping someone, and Nathan had actually gone as far as telling Becky how he'd kill her, saying that he'd use a sledgehammer. She expressed to a family support worker that she was actually scared of Nathan, but it was never investigated. On February 19, 2015, Nathan and Shauna headed over to Becky's house. They knew she was alone, and they took with them handcuffs, a knife, and 2 tasers. Becky was suffocated and stabbed in the abdomen 15 times. She'd obviously fought for her life as she had defensive wounds to her hands and arms. She was then put into a suitcase and placed in the boot of Nathan's car. They then actually stayed at the house for around 6 hours, with other family members arriving home. They then drove to their own house and put Becky in the bath, where they used a circular saw to cut her body into 8 pieces. They then placed the body parts in boxes and bags of salt. Nathan then actually paid a couple of friends to keep the body for him in their shed. Becky was reported missing the next day, and 2 weeks later her remains were found in the shed of Nathan's friends Jadine and Carl. 2 days after Becky's body was found, Nathan was arrested, and just 3 months later, Shauna was also arrested. Nathan tried to plead guilty to manslaughter, saying that he hadn't meant to kill Becky, he just meant to kidnap her, but that it went wrong and she died. And Shauna said that she hadn't taken part in the actual murder, and Nathan backed up these claims. Shauna was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 17 years. And Nathan was found guilty of Becky's murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 33 years. Jadine and Carl were both found guilty of assisting an offender and sentenced to 2 years.
These are the worst videos online you should never Google, and this is a massive trigger warning. This is the Miss Pac-Man video, and it details the final moments of woman Alejandro Eco Chubb, who was 32 years old and a mother of 3 and was involved in an abusive relationship with her partner Mario Osvaldo. The abuse was so bad her neighbors and local people knew about it but did nothing about it. On October 29, 2018, Mario murdered Alejandra in a brutal, savage attack. Neighbors heard Alejandra's screams and rushed to the scene and saw Alejandra with horrific injuries and, in addition, had both of her hands cut off. The neighbors recorded the situation and it soon went viral on social media. The video is called Miss Pac-Man and it's extremely graphic and it's just nightmarish to watch. The video is short at 1 minute and 30 seconds long and it shows the aftermath of the awful attack Alejandra just suffered. As you play the video, the person filming, who is a local villager, is panning the camera down and focusing on a severed hand that is on the floor. In the background, you hear awful screaming and crying from other locals who walked in on the scene. The camera then pans down to the bed which Alejandra is lying on, and immediately you see how awful her injuries really are. Both of her hands have been cut off and she's been struck in the face with a machete. She was hit horizontally below her eyes and in the middle of her nose. It's so disturbing and it's hard to explain. Essentially, Alejandra was hit so hard with the machete that it made her head look like Pac-Man opening his mouth, which is why the video is titled this. But somehow she is still alive as she lays in the blood-soaked bed. She tries to scream but she can't, and her eyes dart around the room in panic and fear as she lets out horrific groaning sounds. The groans are hard to explain, but it sounds like an animal, like a cat fighting. You hear blood bubbles as she tries to breathe. The camera continues to focus on her, and the combination of the brutality on the screen, the painful sounds Alejandra is making, and also the screams of the villagers in the background is just extremely disturbing. And to make it worse, apparently her 3 children were present when Mario brutally attacked their mother. At one point in the video, Alejandra turns her head slightly as she lays in pain, and you then see how deep the gash in her head really is. The cut is so deep that it almost meets her ears. It's literally 3/4 of the way into her head. The whole video is just disturbing, gruesome, and it's something you just don't want to see. This video is definitely one of the worst videos on the internet, and even though you don't see the act committed on camera, seeing the aftermath of it is absolutely traumatizing. Alejandra was pronounced dead after the video was taken, and Mario was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the brutal crime. Whatever you do, please don't go searching for this video. It's way different than videos I explain because it feels like a real-life horror movie. Trust me when I say this, just please don't search it up. Rest in peace to Alejandra Eco Chubb, and I can't believe this is reality.